Welcome, IT changemakers, to the Dex Show with Tim Flower and Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
So, Tim, I was talking to Mary Anne about the idea of our doing a show on green IT and the hardware lifecycle in particular, and she mentioned somebody called Barbara Matoe, who in that moment was a Nexthink user in the real world working for Origin Energy that Mary Anne said would be a great person to talk to. So we emailed Barbara and we got her autoresponder. It said she was no longer working at Origin Energy. So we were gutted, but we still wanted her on the show. So we tracked her down using social media, only to discover that Barbara was actually joining us. She was actually on her way to becoming a Nexthinker. So you can't swing a cat nowadays, it seems, Tim, without hitting an incoming Nexthinker. This must be the hyper-growth thing that we're always hearing about, right?
And I love it because it makes me a trendsetter. I was one of the first Nexthink customers to come over. And another fun fact, Barb, I've been to Australia as a Nexthinker twice and actually met with the Origin folks before they were a customer and when they were thinking about coming on. So small world, and really, really psyched to have you on the show and here as a Nexthinker.
Absolutely. Welcome to the show, Barbara. Great to have you here. And I guess it's fair to say that we find you between two posts at the moment. Is that right?
Yes. Well, I'm actually moving back to the UK after 18 years down under. So thank you for the intro, guys. And recently finishing up at Origin, I've spent the role in the last 2 years, as everyone else did, in lockdown. So I can say my first day at the old role was first day of lockdown globally. So yay. Which also meant that I had to focus my strategy and efforts at Origin into supporting a working from home workforce. So how do you enable them and keep them going and keep them happy? We had an aged fleet. We upgraded our primary collaboration tool 3 months into lockdown. That was a lovely challenge. We had hardware challenges. So necessity becomes the mother of all invention. So we had to come up with some interesting challenges and we leveraged Nexthink. So thank you, Tim. Thank you, Tim, because the end of my first week, I became the product owner for Nexthink in Origin and leveraged it amazingly so to help us make sure our users were having a great experience.
Fantastic stuff. And we look forward to hearing more of that. But we don't just have Barbara on this week's show. We have a second guest and fourth Nexthinker, Mary Anne herself, Mary Anne Cacciola. We know you already, Mary Anne, of course, but please tell our audience a bit about yourself and your current focus here.
Hey there. Well, I'm new to Nexthink. I joined in July, and I'm currently focusing on sustainable IT. And soon after joining, we had an all-hands call, and our chief people officer announced Nexthink's internal focus on corporate sustainability, and they were creating this internal affinity group, which is a group of employees that basically sign up to become a team of folks that help shape programs and measure progress as Nexthink conducts business in a positive way on society and in the environment. So, fast forward, we called ourselves Green Thinkers and we created new relationships, which I think are very important to our customers as well. We're connected with CSR, with Nina, and I've connected with Martina in IT. And we're bridging this gap between the team, kind of a little bit of a power trifecta almost. And we launched our Green IT solution in September, which was very exciting. And that actually led to a lot of conversations with our customers, like Barb, talking about how are they dealing with the hardware challenges given the chip shortage. I heard from John Layton that we had some great Nexthink ambassadors, and Barb was one of them. So I set up some time to chat with her. She was willing to share her IT experience and challenges she was facing at Origin, not just about sustainable IT, but specifically on dealing with the chip shortage and figuring out how to do hardware refresh. And of course, we had all types of other conversations woven in there about our passion, about the environment, what we think about things that are happening in the world. And basically I thought she's definitely dynamic and fun and exciting. And she's an IT change maker. She's really changing the shape of the conversation that's happening when she was at Origin and in the past in her role. And I thought she's a great person to have on the show. And she recently before we talked, she had just wrapped up her little Green IT panel discussion for Experience Everywhere. And I got a little bit of a sneak peek because it hadn't really run yet. That didn't run until November. But basically, she did a great job on that too. So here we are.
So Barb, let's talk specifically about the hardware and how that fits, right? Mary Anne just mentioned the chip shortage. I think a lot of people are obviously concerned about what the last 2 years of COVID and the chip shortage, and what it's created, the problem it's created for IT. Where do you see folks struggling, and how did a data-led approach help in your experience? What were some of the interesting complexities that you saw where you're at?
So we talked to the chip shortage, but there's a wider issue with regards to the supply chain and also some of the working practices that we have adopted over the last few years. So a lot of organizations don't realize that they could do or they could contribute more to green IT. And Origin, as an energy provider, has an enormous program of work where they are expanding on their green energy solutions. So it makes sense for IT to be in lockstep and contribute to this. And this goes along with the supply chain issues. So how do you extend the life cycle of your devices? You should recycle the devices and your technology and have a conscious disposal approach. So how do you do that in order to make sure that you're meeting your demand and supplying, but also at the other end, how do you environmentally consciously dispose of your devices? Or is there a donation program? We have a donation program to community groups so that we're looking at reuse as well. So we had an additional scrutiny that we put over the device and the models available. So in a lot of organizations, you'll find that people like to go for, and culturally, I suppose, people go for the bright, shiny new. So looking at supply chain issues, you would have to organize with your supply chain. Was there a supply chain available for a device before you would even publish that device as available for use in your organization? So I looked at the data available. I looked at what the fleet usage was, and then I delayed publication of new devices, new models, until our buffer stocks had been used up, because knowing there were supply chain issues, I made buffer stock arrangements with our vendors so that we could draw down on that, and it smoothed the hump of the supply chain. But using up your buffer stock before you went to the bright, shiny new, making sure you validate your supply chain and it's working before you let people procure the devices, and also monitoring how many of the devices were in use for those users. So we did have an example where we introduced, and it was a couple of iterations ago, iPhone 12, and bright, shiny new, $1,400 in Australia to our users, and a user procured one via the internal services, and within 2 weeks procured another one. And I went back and I said, "What happened to your old one?" He goes, "Oh, I broke it." And I went, "Okay, so it's 2 weeks old. We could repair it. And he went, "Oh, no, I bought a new one. Could wait." And it's the wastefulness that I was looking to mitigate. And by monitoring your supply chain, by monitoring what you had in use and who had it, I could ask those questions. If somebody ordered 10 of something, okay, have you got a new block of users? So by using the data and proactively monitoring what devices you had in play, and we had a fair few. We're not the biggest organisation, but when you're talking a few thousand laptops, a few thousand mobile devices, and then you add on top all the other devices that come with that, iPads and etc., it adds up. So you can make small changes that can have quite a positive impact. So, and going back, Tim, to the specific piece in COVID, going back to my previous comment, we had to extend the life cycle of the devices. So how do we do that? Because we still had to upgrade our operating systems to stay current. We did targeted upgrades of the hardware devices themselves. and used Nexthink data to understand the use of the device, and what they were using it for, who they were, their role, and that led to both hardware and application-based usage information so that we could understand the true impact of the device. And also Nexthink, fantastically enough, told us if a device wasn't performing well, and that meant we could either swap out the device for a better one or we could get them a new one. We paused our refresh program. So with people working from home, devices in Australia, and I'm not quite sure if everyone's aware, but Australia is a pretty big country. And to refresh a device, we would have to courier it to their house. And that's not cheap. So with our refresh program being paused, you have to understand that we had geographically dispersed issues as well as cost issues. So when we looked to refresh somebody's device, we did it for a darn good reason. Factoring in the supply chain of the devices, the refresh activities, they were prioritised. So we prioritised them. We upgraded devices due to RAM issues. Going back to an earlier comment, we upgraded our primary collaboration tool 3 months into lockdown. And there's nothing quite like Microsoft Teams to be a hungry beastie on resourcing and resources. So we ended up with a couple of models in our fleet that needed RAM upgrades just so they would keep working, which was a lot of fun. You can understand. I'm using fun liberally here. We also introduced a hibernation policy, which directly contributed to extending the battery life cycle of the device. So I'll talk to device health later on, but the hibernation policy was actually an amazing win-win for us. So from a green IT as well as an asset refresh perspective, it was a win-win because it was extending the battery life of the devices. And then going back to, we reviewed who gets the device and why. So role-based device and personas is quite important, really, because from a persona, you really understand who needs what and why, and you can appropriately assign and allocate the devices to them, and also really manage your current fleet without having to go to new, and it mitigates the impact of the supply chain, quite frankly, because if you're making sure you're optimizing your existing fleet, it has a financial benefit, a performance benefit, and it's actually greener. So that's part of my green IT agenda.
There's so many threads to pull on there. One of the comments you made was about small changes making big impacts. And Tom, that draws me back to our great episode with Ariana Huffington. Make little changes and you can make some big impact. The other one I want to touch on was the iPhone incident. And you're using data to influence how you operate, but you're also using data to influence how your employees operated, right? Talk a little bit about how you changed employee behavior versus the behavior of your IT teams and the operation.
So when our users are working from home, and my experience at Origin was that they were, if things didn't go well, because your laptop is your primary collaboration tool, and if it didn't work for them well, it's frustrating and it's impactful. And when people were going through a new way of working from home, and that could exacerbate something small and become a bigger thing. So what we did is we changed how we communicated with the user base. We made sure that they knew what we were doing and why, and we changed the language that we were using with users, because users, at the end of the day, they'll get email after email from IT and it'll just go lost in the wash. So how are you communicating and what are you actually saying? So we used internal social media platform. We used the Nexthink pop-ups because we used it for a number of reasons, but also you could use targeted campaigns for the Nexthink pop-ups to let people know what was happening and when and why, and it's salient message, not IT speak, but normal language, so that what we can make it clear to everybody is we were only replacing the devices where it was necessary, because users become attached to it. Working from home, primary collaboration tool, so they become wedded to their device. I've got to say, even when we refreshed their device, they wanted to keep the old one as a backup, but also because you get used to a setup. Humans are change averse by nature, I don't happen to be that kind of human. I don't pretend to be normal. And for me, change has been a constant in every role I've had. So working out how to communicate differently is key here, because people need to understand that they're at the front of your thinking. I'm going to go back to a comment I made about the hibernation policy. We actually tied the device health to human health. So what we did is we said with the hibernation policy, what we want to do is we want to make your device as healthy as possible for you. How about you also make sure you're as healthy as possible for work? So at the end of the day, even if the hibernation policy, it would kick in if you were away during the day, etc. But at the end of the day, how about you shut down, log off, shut down your machine and turn off the power switch? And that is your trigger to go be you after work. So you could focus on your wellness. You could focus on separation of work and life, because when you're working in your home, people weren't actually walking away. It was there as a presence. So it was just a mental trigger. Shut the lid, turn off the power, you're now you. So we tied the device health, because that activity is also very beneficial for your device itself. We tied that activity to the human side of things so that we could make sure that there was balance. And overall, it was a great outcome because people needed to feel that it wasn't just a work focus, that we weren't communicating with them just because, and we were thinking about our work only. So when you personally invest in what you're doing, you want to know that you are personally invested in. And that was the messaging that came across.
And I know a lot of what you talk about here, Mary Anne, maybe this is for you. A lot of what Barb's talking about makes me think about the new Nexthink Insights report, right? I wonder if you could share a little bit about what in that report, what it looks like.
Exactly. I mean, that report has so many of the same data points and comments that Barb has made for IT to consider as they're managing like billions of devices, and the digital consumption and load we're all contributing each and every day at work. And the report quantifies some key steps to reduce carbon footprint. And more importantly, it also links how to save money, because it's also very helpful to catch management's attention when you're in IT and you're trying to roll out projects and you're trying to change behavior and you're spending time on these projects. You want to make sure that you're linking the cost savings and those reductions within the organization, and that the huge cost savings is really clearly outlined in the report, as well as the impact on the environment. And that impact is pretty cringeworthy, which also speaks to how we really need to change our behavior. And IT is really is today and needs to play a critical role. So it definitely calls attention to the chink in the armor of traditional hardware refresh programs and plans, and the weakness with hardware plans and how expensive and costly they can be. The report talks about, geez, you really need to stop tossing out perfectly good devices and start thinking of extending their device life cycles with updates. And it also reveals the common misconception. This is sometimes within IT, or maybe the adoption of some guidelines over and over each year. But also employees think because my laptop is old, it needs to be replaced. That's the reason for the poor performance. But they really the report goes into depth and talks about how that's not necessarily true. The device, Tim, the device age isn't always the reason for the poor performance. So the report calls out, well, with the DEX score, maybe you can actually see that despite the age of the device, it's actually still delivering a high level of employee satisfaction. So those devices are perfectly good to keep despite the age. Just forget about the age. I mean, not 100% forget about it, but definitely that's not the exact and only reason. In fact, the report talks about a lot of the applications that we're all using at work. I think we're analyzing in the report 3.5 million devices, and they talk about slow startup times and how that translates to slow performance and poor employee experience and loss of productivity. And it also quotes 450 tons of CO2 emissions a year. That's pretty astounding. I mean, those are pretty big numbers and scary. And I'd love to quote all the stats, but, spoiler alert, I don't want to tell everybody. I want to make sure that they're definitely going to
read the report.
Read the report, and I think they're going to find some interesting things that point to, geez, what are those apps that employees are using on their work devices? So in addition to our normal email and communications, it turns out maybe even some gaming apps that might be a little grabbing some of that device capability, right, Tim? And, all that extra work that the devices are doing, the report again links it directly to the CO2 emissions. So plenty of tips to help guide IT. I think they're going to find it really insightful and relevant. And they're going to maybe use some of these tips and tricks, again, to change that conversation between IT, perhaps your CSR and ESG sustainability projects, and turn the dial down on the IT carbon footprint.
And I keep telling my boss, I may be old, but I can still perform. So don't throw me away just yet.
That's right. We have more time. We have plenty of life left in us.
I feel like I'm representing the new here, the shiny new. No, but no. Listen, Mary Anne, that's a great primer for the report, and of course, listeners can find it in the show notes. But a question for you more generally, Mary Anne. When we think about this aspect of green IT, how do you see it developing specifically over the next couple of years?
So I think it's going to become super important. And our customers and organizations are all focusing. You can see on their websites, they have sustainability programs and plans. And they're as they start to turn their focus to 2030 goals that they've made or set out, time is really flying. I mean, objects are, like in your mirror, objects are closer than they appear. Time's flying. Those 2030 goals are going to come up quick. So I think IT is definitely going to start refocusing after they've been able to enable the whole workforce to be remote. Check the box. Next big thing. Organizations are going to start reprioritizing and bringing this up on their radar. So, there are a lot of organizations that are in transportation and manufacturing. They've been focused on this a lot, but IT really needs to they are playing a critical role. I mean, Barb's already playing this role. We had our community call and a good handful of our customers on that call. They definitely had sustainability plans and programs going already and in plan for 2022. There were a handful that still didn't have anything, but I'm hoping that they're really this is going to bubble up to the surface. There's scope for CO2 emissions. And again, some of those really visible plans on people's and organizations' websites are getting to net zero. How are we going to get there? These are direct or indirect carbon emissions. Well, scope 3 is what IT can really start to, again, make an impact on. Reduce our consumption, maybe practice some digital sobriety, understand your use and your consumption. And IT can help with all those best practices.
That's outstanding. Barb, one last question for you. I know what excited me about coming to Nexthink, and I can talk for hours about it. But what most excites you about becoming a Nexthinker? And from an employee or a user perspective, are you taking any greener practices or attitudes into your onboarding process?
I'm excited to help change, enable change, really. I love it. So some of the practices I'm looking to share is optimizing and prolonging the device life cycles so that the users are comfortable. It's a big thing. The user's comfort is tied to their devices. The user experience is a great way of measuring it, but also we can assist organizations with both their user experience and their green IT works. Green reuse or disposal programs could be incorporated into the organization's processes and psyches, and we can use some of our reporting and show organizations both from a human and a business perspective. And I use those words deliberately because sometimes when you're looking at something being cost effective, there are human costs that you can put into there, which then doubles up on the cost effective solutions for a business. So if you've got a cost saving that comes from utilizing your greener IT and the reporting that's coming from the insights, what you might find is that if your users are happier, they're more likely to disrupt the organization, aka by having problems or leaving, which again can become a disruptor for an organization. So by thinking ahead and how we're processing the devices, so the green reuse and the disposal, how we're listening to the users and using the information that we have to optimize our fleets. I think organizations could be helped through the process by seeing easy steps that other organizations have already taken and the information and approach they've used to make a step change in their own green IT agenda. So I'm excited to continue to share my experience and help others where I can, because that's what I do and what I love doing.
Excellent. And what about you, Mary Anne? Has all of this green IT made you a more, shall we say, conscientious user of IT?
So much so. When I first joined, I didn't know necessarily I was going to be working on sustainability, and they shipped me my laptop. This was the first step in the smack in the head to recognize things. Coworker had a really cool monster screen, and they said, "We love this." And I said, "I want one." So I did the whole bright, shiny new thing. I have 2 other screens already. I still went for it, not paying attention, started working on sustainability. I'm doing exactly what we shouldn't be doing. So I went in and changed my request. Hey, guess what? That request also saved Nexthink over $400. I'm still using my screens. They're not in the landfill. Might not be the best resolution, but they're still working for me. And I get very passionate about it. We're passionate as green thinkers. We talk about it a lot. We get excited. Sometimes it can sound a little preachy, but hopefully we're just telling people, take a break, like Barb says, shut down. It's good for you. It's good for the environment. Make all these little baby changes that'll hopefully add up.
Absolutely. And I'm going into hibernation right when we finish this call too. So
there you go.
I'm going to bed because it is actually 9 p.m. here in London. But that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much to Barb and Mary Anne for coming on the show. Looking forward to working with you, Barb, and also hopefully seeing you in the flesh sometime in the UK, hopefully. We're, of course, going to put a link to the new Nexthink Insights report right there in the show notes, and it leaves me with nothing else to say than until next time, and good night, Changemakers.
To make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. If you'd like to learn more about how Nexthink can help you improve your digital employee experience, head over to nexthink.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.